Hello, everyone, and here we are with the neoclassical chapter. This has taken me a couple of attempts to get right, but I feel confident this one's going to work. So, up until this point, let's think about what happened from the serious, heavy-handed Baroque to the light-hearted, comedic, sarcastic Rococo. The pendulum is swinging now back towards the serious, and there are a couple other things going on. First, I should say that while this is going to be a really short lecture and a short presentation, that is not to dismiss the level of dialogue and the extent to which they're really digging into deep topics here. We're going to look at political portraiture. We're going to discuss slightly the effects, or rather the influence of the Academy, and look at a couple of great artists from this time. Um, because of the lasting power of the Academy, France has clearly been identified as the de facto, or rather the cultural capital of Europe. Not necessarily the religious capital, but the cultural. At times, you might see artists trying to play nods or pay respect to religious painting. But for the most part, it's about the image and the branding and the true style that the neoclassical style became to be known as. And true meaning, think about it like this. 50 years ago, someone in America might say, if you want to be an artist, you got to go to New York. If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. That's where you go. Apparently, New York was some kind of gold standard or true place to craft and make artists or make actors. The same thing could be said here. If you studied at the Academy, then you were truly an artist. The Academy defined the great styles. Now, obviously, in the book, there's a section that talks about the French Revolution, and that is important. We're going to try not to dig too deep into the history and what was going on during the Revolution. There are some key points that are just so easy to see. We'll address that when we get to it, though. For now, the Republican sentiments of Jacques-Louis David can be seen here. Uh, I, okay, I'm not going to dig into the war, but I will say that the Republican side, and we're not talking Democrats, Republicans, but Republic, what's happening in France, in the French Revolution, rather. He is addressing these issues and feelings with a universal, timeless, classical view. By putting them in that Roman garb or that Greek garb, he assigns a universal suffering to the plight of the French man. And here, in this image on the right, the death of Marat, the death of Jean-Paul Marat, he has, mimicked in a way Christ's lowering from the cross, or the death of Christ, um, with the arm hung low, the blood trickling down, the pool of blood like the blood in the cup of Christ. Marat, who suffered from a condition, has been somewhat idealized here. In fact, he had a severe skin condition that required, or, well, made his life easier when he spent time in a tub. The waters were soothing and he could go on to write. And it was one of his nurses in the hospital that killed him from behind, or, well, killed him from the front, Charlotte Corday. You can see the dagger down below, the dagger and the sword. Which one is truly winning here? While the dagger has slain the man still holds tightly one of his messages, and indicating Charlotte Corday as his murderer. If you spoke French or understood French, you could read the statement there. It's not necessary. You're not going to be tested on it, but it's rather interesting. This sickly man now put in this very dramatic lighting, reminiscent of Baroque painting, or rather religious painting, the soft overall glow. So from that, we now look at Napoleon. Napoleon, who of course originally was much more of a different man compared to what we see here. Here we see this strong, proud, tall man in his horse who, if he's rearing it back like that, he obviously must be a very accomplished rider. While some people may be able to do that with one hand, Napoleon really didn't ride horses. In fact, he rode a mule because of his stature. So this is an idealized equestrian portrait, much like those equestrian portraits of old. We have some added elements to it, like the soldiers following behind, him at the front, crisp and bold in the forefront, leading the way, so to speak, and are, well, looking over them as they march. And at his feet, you can see carved into the rocks the names of these great rulers before, whether Hannibal so long ago or Carolus Magnus, known to us more commonly as Charlemagne. Bonaparte, whose name is now straight, strong, and carved deeply into the rocks, where Hannibal's name seems more scratched or faded by time, and Charlemagne's somewhat more clumsy. This idealized portrait is but one of the few, one of many in some cases, but one of the few pieces that we're going to be looking at here that help to revitalize interest in classical work. The neoclassical style, which was coming out of France, helped to reinforce that image of Napoleon as the ruler. When you add to the fact the creation of the Arc de Triomphe, again, another classical, or rather Roman symbol, it serves to reinforce the impression of the branding of Napoleon as this great ruler, hearkening back to the majesty that was Rome, the glory that was Rome. Here, and we will look at this in some detail, we can see, well, we'll look at both. We see these portraits following in more the classical tradition, not the Hellenistic. You know, classical, idealized, not very emotional, more like the classical period of Greece. The Romantic we could see as the more Hellenistic, and we'll get to that in a moment. Here, though, two wonderful examples of work that if you did not know they were made in the 19th century, you might very well think they are from some Roman villa. It has all the features of that wet drapery and that classical idealization of the figure, down to the multicolored stone and the addition of the gold. We see that as well in the idealization of this figure here. Now, what is an odalisque? An odalisque is, in fact, a harem girl, a harem woman. And the grand odalisque means she's the baddest bee in the bunch, the queen bee, so to speak. She is the grand lead woman in the harem. This painting is, while beautiful, a bit off-putting for some because of the proportions. Namely, the leg here, for one, the back and the situation between the back and the hips for another. If you take a look here, there's the right buttocks on the right side of the hip, and down below there's the other buttocks, but somehow the leg and the knee come over in some yoga type move. It looks rather awkward. When you add to the fact that one foot is longer than the other, it's even more strange to look at. One of the things that's really interesting about this is the fact that it's so smooth and so much attention has been given to realism. At times, now obviously I'm zooming in really tight on it, but when you look at it in your book or look at it on the screen in class, it might look like this was, cut out of a magazine and simply pasted on. Well, that is a development that is part of the neoclassical style. A couple of chapters ago I mentioned with the Academy that argument between design and color. Disegno, colorito, to use the Italian. Here, the classical style holds true to this dedication to line, accuracy, and expression through line, expression through that fascination. You'll see a clearer contrast when we compare this with the Romantic, but for now, you could look at this up close and not see any, if many, brushstrokes. Ang has taken careful attention to the smoke, but the real subtle detail is in that of the body. The careful attention to all the texture, which we can identify with the Rococo chapter, but whose game has been upped greatly in the neoclassical. Moving on to one of the most egotistical political portraits I've ever seen, we have Napoleon enthroned. Now with Ong, I have these two little statements here, these two sentences that really help to sum up what he was about, and to a greater extent, what the academic style in the neoclassical period was about in Paris. When we look at this painting, we see a ruler that is absolute, that is above you on many different levels. Let's see if we can pull up a larger version. Alright, here we are. So now we can look in detail at, the glow from the rod and the glow from the gold onto his face. And I've got a couple of versions here, each one a little different. That's one of the downsides to seeing artwork that is not right in front of you. You never know if it's accurate or not. This is a pretty good photograph, a pretty good image. Now, when we look at this, what is so egotistical about it? Well, for one, he's in a throne that is high above you, supported by eagles. He is not just on a throne, but on a pillow above, so his foot doesn't even touch the ground that is above you. And if you look down here, you'll see conveniently enough that his pillow, and to an extent, he has been mounted or is supported by this eagle. And the eagle looks in proportion carefully through the creation of that rug. So he who sits on a throne on high, on a pillow on high, is made even higher because it is resting on an eagle. Now, if that isn't enough to be above you, then you can look at the religious elements that are added to him. The halo of the golden wreath on his head, and to a lesser extent the mandorla-like arch above him. The third thing of all, not to be confused with the shocker, the hand on the rod to our right, his left. Now that symbol is very commonly seen in images of Christ as a symbol of benediction and blessing. Christ's right hand will hold it as if he is blessing or pardoning someone. And so here he implies his closeness to the faith with these symbols and with that gold. You can see some rather classical or other timeless elements in this sculpture here on top, a past king who holds the world in his hand. Does Napoleon hold the world in his hand here? No. That is beneath him. He's got other things to do. And so rather than holding the world simply rests under his cloak. Meaning to say that I hold too much power. The power, that I hold here is, I'm too busy dealing with the concerns of state and faith to worry about the world. The world is safe under my rule. If you are not, then you are in shadow and darkness and chaos and ruin. Cats and dogs living together in mass hysteria. With all that said, think about what we've seen before in religious art, where light equals innocence, purity. Light equals goodness, whereas darkness here equals ignorance, sin, doom, and gloom. It's a rather egotistical image, full of rich details of a man who had some serious issues. Napoleon enthroned. Now, as we move across the water, we look at America. And obviously the French Revolution, which will have some influence to the American Revolution, which will have some influence to the French Revolution, was creating a strong break from King George. That break was not just political, but as well cultural. Here we don't see colonial architecture. Rather, we see more minimal, more classical architecture in this painting by Trumbull. We'll get into more detail into it in just a moment. It is that breaking from King George and that breaking in the revolution from the colonies to an American country that helps to lead into this next part. Why do our buildings look this way? Why is the neoclassical revival of the neoclassical style so important to the development of American art? Well, it is because of Thomas Jefferson. whose sculpture we see here. Thomas Jefferson, who traveled to France. Thomas Jefferson, who traveled abroad and looked at the classical works, the neoclassical works that were in France, who obtained a copy of the Four Books on Architecture by Palladio. He brought this back and saw how this timeless appeal of this universal message could be seen through classical forms, and assigned it to his buildings. While Thomas Jefferson, not strictly an architect, his influence can be seen in telling the architects, do this, do this, do this, which is why our capitals, our courthouses, our universities and libraries have this classical look to them. They are symmetrical, they are strong, they are powerful, they are erudite. These are the buildings of our country. This building looked very much like one building we've looked at before, the Pantheon, in which a perfect sphere is built inside of a cube. Here, more the sphere is inside of the cylinder with the oculus at the top. Whereas this building looks more like the Pantheon. No, sorry, the Parthenon. Pantheon, Parthenon. The Parthenon, at least in the front, with the gabled roof, the pediment featureless, but still very that strong front like the Parthenon. Now, we move to a very different political portrait, and that is George Washington. George Washington was not a ruler like Napoleon, obviously. And the portrait that's here gives us a very different impression. What can we say about George Washington in this portrait? Well, while he is powerful, he is above us, he is not completely above us. Obviously, because he is a president, he is one of us that is then elevated. Because he is wearing the toga, the garb, synonymous with classical dress, he is not one person. Yeah, think of it like that saying, you respect the position. You don't have to respect the man, but you do have to respect the position. And that is done here by, not so much addressing the man, but the idea of that man in control, that man in power, the President of the United States of America. He has been given power. The sword has been given to him, or rather, he is giving power to you. It seems to say that with his hand outstretched, his hand stretched high, he is saying, by the grace of God, I, who have been elected to serve you, will serve to the best of my abilities. It seems as if he is ready to take the oath of allegiance, or the oath of the office. And that is a very different portrait than that of Napoleon, who seems to look not above you, not at you, but simply through you because of his absolute rule. The expression here is not so much strong or weak, but simply admire me. Whereas George has this strong, stern, very serious look, implying, I will do this, a face of strength, surety. And as to whether or not he had that kind of body, I think we can say that's more fitting with the tradition of idealizing the body and fitting that classical body. The inclusion of animals here, just like the other portrait, playing a different role rather. What kind of animals are on his throne? We see lions, and lions, of course, are symbols of strength. Now, why do we not see this portrait more? Why is it we talk more about Washington crossing the Delaware, or that stony, hard-jawed portrait of him and painting that we often will see more than the sculpture? Well, that is because this portrait was made in France, and once it was transported to the United States, well, neoclassical art was passé. It was too old. The United States was already moving on to the next great thing. So now it occupies a dark corner far in the back of one of the Smithsonian institutions, and we don't really look at it. In Trumbull's the Declaration of Independence, we see the Founding Fathers assembling in a classical building. The cornice above looking very Greek or Roman, really more Greek. The decoration very minimal. And these men have been, kind of juxtaposed. You have this classical space, but very modern, contemporary dress. So it kind of says these men of the moment are addressing a universal, profound, classical thing. And that, of course, is the Declaration of Independence. Looking in the foreground, you might recognize some of the dollar bill type figures, whether it's Washington or Harrison. You could spot through and play Find the Fathers in this, but we're not going to do that. These are the main images for this chapter, and these are the main words. You definitely need to know aquatint, ground. Well, really, these are more the words for the next chapter, but while I'm thinking about it, you definitely need to know aquatint, wash, watercolor, ground, gouache, medium. In fact, you need to know all of them. Binder and medium we've already discussed from the prehistoric chapter, so some of these are just really more review. The next chapter is in the same PowerPoint. It is deeply connected, but we're going to split up the PowerPoint, the YouTube videos, to give you a break and give myself a break because I feel like this one's good. This is my fourth. I'm sticking with it. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you in class.